arguably we're already in a form of World War III. And so therefore we should arm up and we should take measures that we need to take in order to prepare ourselves for the worst possible outcome so it does not get to that worst possible outcome.
But right now, there are far too many younger Europeans of fighting age who do not believe in the societies that they would be asked to kill or die for. And that is a huge problem that will not be solved by forcing them to bear arms.
We're at the Danube Institute tonight, and we are going to examine the question, the EU should mandate conscription. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, move. Okay. Could you, sir, come 1 foot forward, Mr. Dreher? And could you, sir, please come 1 foot forward to, there you go. You have 5 minutes to have a conversation. Go.
Well, I think your position first. Go ahead.
Well, Calum, I am strongly against mandatory conscription, in part because I believe that an army made up of primarily of draftees is going to be a less effective army. There is an immense number of Europeans today who say that they would not fight even for their country. It's shocking, and I hate that, but do you really want to pull these people into the military? To say nothing of all the migrants who are now in so many European countries. I think that it would make for a weaker military. And in time of war, absolutely mandatory conscription, but we're not there yet. And I think mandatory conscription allows European leaders to glide over or elide the real political problems that they have to deal with in terms of diplomacy.
Well, I think what I'm thinking about is national service. I suppose that's in the context of conscription. But I think in terms of, I see national service certainly, and I think conscription even would be a great level of society. We're living in very divided societies right now. Everyone's being put into the same situation. I have some confidence that the military, certainly in Western countries, is disciplined enough in its training to actually train people up and to actually keep discipline within it. And also we keep talking about the fact that in Western society that all these young men in particular are feeling very lost. Well, actually joining something like the military tends to provoke people at least to develop some sort of character, these sorts of things. So I do think it's a valid thing to try.
Yes, but under a mandate, I think that's the rub right there. That if people wish to join, I think that's a fine and wonderful thing. But I think that you, as I said earlier, you get a weaker military if you have people who are there under arms, not wanting to be there. And I think conscription really works in a society that has a general consensus about right and wrong and a sense of national responsibility to the nation. That does not exist now. That radically doesn't exist in Western Europe. And I think that it's just not a good idea at this point. And what about women? You know, will women also be forced to be conscripted? I think that probably they would be in contemporary society. I think that's a terrible thing.
Well, first of all, I think that there are many roles now in the modern military. Not all of them are frontline soldiers, first of all. So, I mean, for instance, drones are a massive part of it now. Flying drones doesn't require you to be at the front line. But I also think we're taking a rather defeatist attitude, quite honestly. If the attitude is the younger generation are not up to that sort of challenge, they won't perform well, I don't think that's the right attitude. We should assume that we should try and solve that problem. And I do think...
By forcing them to join? I mean... You know, it sounds like magical thinking to me, the idea that if we force them to go by law, then suddenly that will sort everything out.
Well, I mean, I still think that there's a lot of different roles they can play, and at the end of the day, I think the context within which the EU would have conscription would not be an offensive war where we're invading another country, I'd hope, in which case I certainly would not support it. But right now, reality is what reality is. We can imagine the world as we think it ought to be, but the reality is right now, the world's changing fast, there are rising aggressive powers, Europe has been wildly unprepared for any sort of war, we've been protected by the Americans for the last 40, 50 years, the Americans have now left. What are we going to do? We need to jumpstart our defensive capabilities. And I don't think conscription is a I understand it has a checkered history, and I understand that the notion of the state forcing anyone to do anything is not an ideal situation. But we are not in an ideal situation. We're living in a world now where arguably we're already in a form of World War III. And so therefore we should arm up and we should take measures that we need to take in order to prepare ourselves for the worst possible outcome so it does not get to that worst possible outcome.
Yeah, I agree with you that Europe needs to rearm and take its own self-defense more seriously than it has. We're complete agreement there. But I think first European leaders and European societies need to deal with their own domestic issues to help the ordinary people understand why their societies are worth defending. And that, I think, is a prerequisite to military service when you're not in an emergency situation. And I don't believe that we are in World War III.
But the thing is that is an ideal situation where everything's perfect and we can do things in the order in which we wish to do them. But the reality is we're faced with circumstances now and pressures now where things are moving so fast that we can't wait to sort out all the other problems. You know, if you look at what's happening in the States right now, I'm no particular fan of Elon Musk, but his approach, generally speaking, he says we do things fast and we do it now and we go back in later and change 10% of the things we took away. He says we need to act first and we fix some of the problems later. And I just think on a number of things in society, we need to wake up and we need to act faster. And I think that's conscription is a messy concept. If you take it to a complete extreme, obviously it's not something that we'd want to have in a completely blanket manner. But I do think the concept of saying, right, people should have some sort of national service at the very least, which is a form of conscription.
But no, I don't want to argue with that because I would agree with you. National service is
you
probably
can join me over here. It's fine.
A good idea. But no, we're talking about conscription for war, for military combat. I've talked to U.S. military officers about this issue because I used to think it was a good idea.
We're out of time, but I'll give you the last word and then I'll give you closing statements.
Yeah, and they all say, no, conscription was a bad idea. There was a good reason we left the draft behind after the Vietnam War because of the quality of troops that came in.
Look, I understand that the concept of all these topics is pretty hideous. I'm not someone who's gung-ho for conscription in a vacuum, but we're simply not in a vacuum. I think we all care about our families, we care about our society, we think there are things bigger than ourselves. We're in a context right now where the Americans have literally just said they're going to pull away a lot of the support for Europe. Who knows how long even NATO might last. We're in a context where, as a continent, we need to start acting like we've been fledged from the nest, that we're not simply reliant on the Americans looking after us. And I think in the context of that, some form of conscription, I'm not saying where everyone is sent to the front line, but I'm saying something where people are starting to consider that they owe something, there is something greater than themselves that they ought to be contributing to. And I think part of that, sadly, under the current circumstances, is facing the reality that we are facing martial aggression.
Okay, Rod, I'll give you 30 seconds for the final comment.
Well, I think that we do need to have much more solidarity and willingness to defend what we have. But right now, there are far too many younger Europeans of fighting age who do not believe in the societies that they would be asked to kill or die for. And that is a huge problem that will not be solved by forcing them to bear arms.
All right. Thank you. I'm going to give one question to each person from the audience.
Yeah, so my question is, have the two speakers actually responded to the statement? Because the statement seems to center on the EU having the mandate to mandate conscription, whereas currently we have national militaries in the EU, so it seems to be up to the nation states and the EU members at this point whether they have conscription or not. And I'm not sure if this should be a mandate given to the EU, but is that what the speakers wanted to imply, what you wanted to imply, Calum?
No, it would have been, for me, it would have been nation states, so I don't think the EU should be mandating this, but I do think states should be encouraging national service and bringing that back, as many countries used to have.
Rod, I would want to answer that.
I would have been on absolutely disagree if it had been the EU itself. I understood it as member states of the EU. I think there are very few people in Europe who would actually fight and risk death or killing others for Brussels.
Okay, we have another question. We have a question over here.
Yes, so my question would be focus on the same topic because we're speaking about the EU. So do you think that it is actually necessary to give this power to the EU when nations individually, like for example Germany or even Romania, thought about making the mandatory conscription? It is actually necessary for EU to mandate this?
No, well, I don't know legally, but I think that it'd be best left in the hands of the nation states.
I agree. It has to be nation states because people are willing to come up with the internal wherewithal to go do the sort of things that war requires only to defend the nation, not to defend a transnational entity to which they feel no natural loyalty.
All right, we had a final question over here.
Have any of you served in the military? Well, nobody has served. Okay. So it's kind of difficult, I think, for you to take positions without really
Why?
understanding.
Why?
Sorry?
I'm curious about that. Explain.
Without having served, and whether it's in combat or non-combat role, the concept behind it, and you touched on it, you both have have valid points, but when you talk about national pride, national service, and yes, there are opinions where draftees were not as good as the enlisted army, and that is true. But for the most part, 96%, 97% of it worked out very well. And finally, I'll say this: we all come from different countries, but in the United States, if you serve in the U.S. military for 4 years, you come out with the GI Bill, and that entitles you to $300,000 for educational expenses. It could be undergrad, graduate, law school.
You have to go
and
for
many
a
people
question.
have taken advantage.
You good? Everybody good? All right, thanks. Is everybody satisfied with the line that they're standing on? You're confident? All right, give them a hand.
The front line.